We're back, we're live, we're Think Tech. Today we're doing West of Asia with Rafi Boritzer. And his real name is Rafik Ben Avraham Boritzer, right? Okay? He's an Israeli, but actually he's been in this country for about 200 years already.
On and off, yes.
On and off, thank you. And he is a lecturer at West Oahu campus of UH. And today we're going to talk about something very timely. That is the Israeli view of the talks with Iran, which I think everyone needs to know about because this is where the crosshairs meet somehow today in our time. So Rafi, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Thanks for coming down. So you must have been thinking and reading and, involving yourself in the process over the talks between the U.S. and Iran. I mean, it's got to be the most notable turnabout in the last few months, anyway, in the Middle East. Is it as optimistic as it seems to be?
I'm always an optimist, and I think there is reason to be optimistic. Not that everybody will be happy with the outcomes, not that everybody will cheer, laugh, and dance, but I think if we look at the totality of the world, everybody will probably be better off than some of the alternatives being considered.
Like nuclear explosions.
Right. I think that the cleanup, if we interject a little bit of American politics into it, I can't see the Republican Congress perhaps allocating money for disabled veterans who have very severe nuclear after effects, and rebuilding Iran as we did with Germany and Japan. The cost would be so prohibitive but you never know, maybe the Chinese will finance it all.
Well, let's talk about, the view, if you will, the Israeli view, but also the American view of Iran. I mean, when Jimmy Carter was first elected, he had a pail of cold water in the face with that kidnapping and detention that lasted for much too long. It was a sad time. It was the end of an era where we had been friendly with the Iranians and the Shah of Iran, and then all of a sudden the religious interests entered into it, and we were essentially at war with them, with a stalemate where we lost, in terms of world credibility. And it's pretty much stayed that way. They've been rogue all this time. How many years is that? Oh, gee whiz. That's
33 years.
33 years they've been rogue. And it's just gotten worse and worse. They hate us, and they certainly hate Israel. They're as anti-Semitic as anybody these days, or they have been. Maybe it's just facade. But, how do you see that?
Well, first of all, I'm glad you used the word facade because everything in political reality is facade.
Thank you.
Everything is a stage play. Everything is staged for effect or to leave an impression or to scare people or to make them feel happy about the situation that there is just going to be a disaster very shortly. But if you're talking about countries like Israel, countries like the United States, probably not so much in Europe, but those two countries, one has a relative history of war, Israel, and the other one had a relative history of peace in terms of on its own territory, and has learned to have wars elsewhere.
But just smart.
Just smart. That way you don't destroy your own economy at the same time. But I think that the point I want to make is that those two countries are so fast and so dynamic in terms of technology, social change, culture, origin and ethos of social and cultural milieu, that in that rapidity of change, they forget the lessons from the past. Mm-hmm. Whereas if we look at Europe, and if we just isolate, for instance, the Islamic Asia and Middle East and Africa, those countries relive their past. And to a more extreme, probably the Muslim world relives its past almost every day because that's the structure of their culture based upon the past. The Europeans live it because they want to avoid bad alliances that they've had throughout their history, whether they were Napoleonic, whether they were Hitler or other reasons for going to war. But in America and Israel, we seem to always forget the conflicts we've been involved with, and we're always ready to show our muscle. without remembering that there are consequences. And those consequences are not just borne by the people who fought in the war, but by the 2 or 3 generations later on. Because if you take America, for instance, we are still talking about the Vietnam War. Those of us, the cohort, you, myself, and others who lived through that era, remember like yesterday. And yesterday when we talk to the youngsters, or when we talk to a new crop of politicians in the American congressional habitat, it's like Vietnam, this has no effect on my life. But again, the quick forgetting.
They don't know or remember. It doesn't have any effect
they
on
don't
their
remember
thought
the
process.
pain. They don't remember the social disruption. And sometimes social disruption does bring some social benefits. The disruptive behavior after World War II. We have the Levittown, the suburbs. If we're talking about Vietnam, we had freedom, more recognition of gays, people with disabilities. The Civil Rights Act kind of prospered after that.
Right,
so there are always some good effects that come about because it
Yes.
requires some social change. The social disruption. Now, if we're talking about the Middle East, we are on the cusp of something big in the Middle East happens.
Because of this Iran discussion with
Well,
Iran.
let's look at the envelope surrounding
Okay,
Iran.
I want to do that, yes.
Envelope.
This is a really interesting conversation.
What is the
I'm getting drawn in. He's a great lecturer.
The envelope is that the Western world and even the Eastern European world and some other areas have all moved very quickly to a new reality that we call the electronic world, where intelligence, warfare, learning, medicine, everything is tied into the electronic. Guess who didn't move into that world? The whole Arab Muslim world. We have to, so it's kind of
Why?
So they didn't move in it. Why is a good question. There was a report in the United Nations about 15 years ago about the output, the technology output, the cultural output, civilized artifact output, and it's so minuscule because their political structure is built around the religious or cultural structure. And the only way you keep control in that scenario is by restricting development. And you need some authority to do that. And where do you get authority? Only from God or your religious beliefs. So when you have that authority, that's the only way you can maintain social control at a huge cost. This has been very beneficial to the dominant technology powers in the world. Basically America.
Because they're way ahead.
Right, because they're way ahead.
And they're getting further ahead every day. No?
And if we look at the past, after World War II, how did America grow its economy? How did Japan reassert itself, and Germany? They reasserted themselves. They came back from the ashes of World War II and even World War I, if you look a little back, simply by finding customers. They had reached the end of the limit of what you can extract from the poor countries that have no defenses against your weapons or your society or your culture and civilization. Extracted. But once you've extracted, now you've created a whole culture of marketing and selling and consuming. And what happens when people don't care about the 1992 Chevrolet anymore? Or they don't care about the 2001 Cadillac? And they have all the goodies they could possibly want. They're on Facebook all day long, and then they suddenly get bored because the apps are not coming quick enough.
So what happens?
You need customers. You need more customers. But to have customers, they have to be able to buy. So in all these scenarios, especially when you're looking at the Middle East, guess what? All the money that all the Middle Eastern countries that had oil or had a strategic value were making wasn't dispersed to grow the civilization of the society, to make them into a consumer society, without even judging whether that's good or bad, but not even to eat at a decent living, you know. They can't even have a McBurger, whatever they sell, yes, because they don't have the kind of money. So what do? I lived for a while in Oman and in Abu Dhabi and Yemen. And guess what they did? Well, Yemen not so much, but guess what those other UAE, who are the allies of the West in protecting the Persian Gulf, what did they do? They brought in more poor people because their people couldn't work anymore. because they had been nomadic. They had been tribespeople with camels in the
They
desert.
needed labor.
They needed labor. So they brought in Bangladeshis, they brought in Indians, they brought in Sri Lankans, they brought in Pakistanis, all the people, the poor people who weren't educated in those countries, brought them over to work, especially those who had some minimal skills or some literacy. They're doing the work. The other people, they go to sleep, they wake up at 11 in the morning, they have coffee,
How
they,
sweet it
they go
is.
falcon hunting, they do all kinds of interesting things. They build skyscrapers 120 stories or now 200 stories. So this is what so this is the structure of what's happening in the Middle East. But guess what happened to the more civilized countries there? The older history. Well, who are the older histories in the Arab world? Egypt, you've got Syria, you've got Iraq, and you've got Iran.
Okay.
3 of those are Arab. 3 of those are Sunni. And they're natural allies, whether it was Egypt or whether it was...
So who's the exception? Who's the
Iran is the exception.
Okay.
So Iran has always been on a triangle, and I think we discussed it last time. There's a triangle, 3 points of closure on the whole Ottoman Empire, Middle Eastern Empire that used to be called the Baghdadi or Mesopotamian Empire. It used to be called the Persian Empire, or it used to be called the Egyptian Empire or the Ottoman Empire, actually.
Oh, sure.
So you've got all these empires. Those are the points where you have to look where the conflicts in the Middle East are coming from. Okay? The Ottomans, they gave up power the last time after controlling for 400 years the whole Mediterranean around 1918 when Ataturk took it over. Right, established Turkey.
He was a great man.
And isn't Turkey wonderful? They have all the
Great
toys.
man. I want a T-shirt with
Now, see, here's a
Ataturk
very
on it,
interesting
yeah.
thing that the Ottomans made sure to pick the brains and the technologies and the behavior of all the countries they ruled in the Mediterranean.
Gets you ahead to do that.
Ataturk came to power. He was actually from Saloniki, Greece, and he also they said that he had a Jewish mother. I'm not so sure about that. They would deny it at this point. But he understood that it wasn't only the material level of the West. The West also had structure, even though the Ottomans had structure, but the West had listened to Max Weber in his discussion of bureaucracies. And bureaucracy didn't necessarily always come, just from one ruler who took care of everything. They had to have levels. So when you look at modern Turkey, they adopted the Western concept of bureaucratic order, which is necessary for economic development, industrialization, a good army.
This is all less than 100 years ago.
Right.
This is modern times.
This is
Ataturk,
modern times. They
times,
did this. They did all this. But in the meantime, the generals are looking around. They say, generals live pretty good. Why shouldn't they have the trappings of democracy, since Turkey was a democracy? So they manipulated some of the more right-wing parties in Turkey, and they ruled until about 10 years ago, when the Muslim population finally became more educated at a much bigger rate. And they started voting, and they said, you know what, all these generals, these were mostly the non-urban people, but they hadn't really voted a lot. They said they were happy as long as I got my land, I don't have a hassle. Now they started voting, and they were persuaded that perhaps they're watching their neighbors all across the Arab world, and they say, we are Muslims nominally, but we don't have any power. And we look at the Muslims, and look at that, they're starting to be agitated. They took over Iran, even though they're not Sunni, but we'll forgive them for that. But they contain the Kurds. They're able to contain the Kurds over there in Iran. And in Iraq, they're containing the Kurd. So maybe we can continue this really good deal going for us. And they do that. So, but to maintain control in a democratic society, you only can do it with elections, and the current regime in Turkey did not have enough faith in that, so it started wanting to institute more Islamic behavior, so it could count on the same electorate to keep them in power.
Erdogan.
Just like the right?
Erdogan.
Right?
So Erdogan is a rational man. He's not crazy.
No, not at all. He's very rational.
He's responding to political forces in Turkey.
Very, very well.
Yeah.
So that's one pivot. We see what's been happening in Egypt. That's the next corner. Okay, because we got really 4 players.
Okay, wait.
Yes.
We're gonna take a break.
Okay.
Hold that thought.
Okay.
Holding that thought. That's Rafi Boritzer, Rafik Ben Avraham.
Ibrahim.
Ibrahim. That's Rafi Boritzer. He's a lecturer at West Oahu, UH. And today we're talking about West of Asia here on Think Tech and the Israeli view of the talks with Iran. And wow, we are learning tons of stuff. I really enjoyed this conversation, but we still have to take a break. We'll be right back after this break. Aloha, I'm Jay Fidell, founder of Think Tech Hawaii. We are a digital media nonprofit that covers things that matter to tech, energy, diversification, globalism, and progress for our state, the state of Hawaii. We broadcast on community television and on Oceanic Cable Channel 16. We also stream our shows and interviews live on the internet as both radio and video, and of course we post them here on YouTube. We collaborate with the Hawaii Venture Capital Association to present monthly luncheon programs on subjects of interest to the business community, and we write for the Honolulu Star Advertiser. ThinkTech works hard to raise public awareness in Hawaii. Check out our website, thinktechhawaii.com, and come to our YouTube channel, Think Tech Hawaii. We hope you support our mission and that you like our work. I'm Jay Fidell. Mahalo. We're back, we're live. We're here with Rafi Boritzer in West of Asia here in Think Tech, talking about the Israeli view of the talks with Iran. And we're getting a fabulous history lesson you'd never get anywhere else. And that's the thing about Think Tech, we take these short breaks, but we want our guests to drill down, and that's what we're getting today. This is so important to know about. So, sorry.
Okay, so let's look at the next pivot in this kind of almost a square or diamond, I'd like to call it, diamond in the rough. It's pretty rough territory over there. So if you're looking at Egypt, which is the next point, history was Egypt was under the Ottomans, and before that was a kingdom. King Farouk was the last Egyptian king, and he was thrown out by Abdul Gamal Nasser.
This was back in the 50s.
52.
No? Yeah.
To revolt of the generals, he set up a socialist, non-aligned, military-led government, ostensibly a socialist democracy, and we all know what that has meant in Eastern Europe, socialist democracies. And anyway, so that's
contradiction
of terms. And although there's always hints that maybe the president was part of this menage, but he wasn't even born then. And anyway, so what happens is they rule, they get overthrown by the next ex-general, which is Anwar Sadat and his group of people. And Anwar Sadat, seeing that after the 3 wars actually, that there was no option but to have a peace agreement with Israel, and he decides to do that. And Jimmy Carter then hosted, I think, and they both got the Nobel Prize for it. With Menachem Begin was the Prime Minister of Israel, a right wing. It was very interesting. A dictator
This in
Egypt.
the 70s.
Right, 1979.
Yeah.
Anwar Sadat was a dictatorial military man. Menachem Begin was a leader of the right-wing Herut Party, Freedom Party, and they bring in also. That was the initial peace agreement. After 3 major wars in Israel, and they signed a peace agreement, conditioned on the fact that there was going to be a Palestinian state and involve Yasser Arafat and all. But this is not so critical till the end of our story about Iran. Anyway, they signed a peace agreement. Peace with Egypt works great. We all know the aftermath. Mubarak lasted till about 2-3 years ago, and then they got rid. Of course, what had happened during the meantime, the military backed him up continuously until they felt that the people were getting very, very restless. And the Muslim Brotherhood took over for about 8 months, 9 months. Now we're back to square one. And again, now in Egypt it's very unique because they are not as illiterate as some of the other players. And so in Egypt you have universities based a lot on Islamic texts and so on, but still graduates. They have a modern army that was not as good as Israel, but a major player financed by America for $1.5 billion.
And supplied by America.
Now, I just a quick word about the supply of arms. Israel gets the same weaponry, a little bit more. I think we get $3.5 billion a year. but people misunderstand. They think that this is cash from Medicare or from this Affordable Care Act. No, it's not. It's basically supports the American economy, because that way Raytheon and L'Oreal and all the military companies got to have sales that they would never have. So it's not cash to improve your situation or develop your country or social standards on it.
Yeah.
That's it. The next place that we have players is Persia is the third pivot of that triangle historically, okay? Because Israel was not a player till about 1948. So you've got Persia. Now Persia under the Shah, they kicked out democratically. The CIA got rid of the democratically elected government. I think it was in 1948 or 49. Installed the Shah in 51 or 52. Mossadegh was the prime minister there, and relations with Israel is great. Israel has built the Iranian army, supported the Shah, financed all their industrial expansion, had a lot of Israeli and American companies in Iran and till the revolution.
It was Camelot in those days.
It was great. Everything was wonderful. Everything for all the people who had big bank accounts in Switzerland, they made out really well. So, but here remember, this is the triangle. This is the name of the game. Thousands of years, and it continues until now. So, who are the other players there? What's happening? Well, first of all, you got Syria. Syria was pretty well aligned with the Sunnis in terms of inside Syria, but the leadership for the last 35 years under the Assad family has been Alawi. The Alawis, they are a form of Shiite, but not pure Shiite, but a form of Shiite. And they're not directly aligned with Iran, although now they're finding some commonality. But they support anybody for political reasons. They have no real ideology, except they had the Ba'ath ideology. The Ba'ath was a socialist movement, just like the Egyptian generals with Nasser Abdel Gamal Nasser, but they were birthed primarily in Iraq and in Syria. They were the Ba'ath party back in the 50s.
Sure.
They formed an alliance. They actually were called the Arab Federation. They had the same flag. Syria, I think, had 3 stars, and Egypt, what was it? Anyway, they were Egypt, Syria, and Yemen were in the federation. They were one country for a while. So
When was that?
Back in the 50s.
Okay.
And early 60s. And so they were trying to maintain an alliance. But then you had some local conflict. Yemenis had their own civil war. The north broke from the south because the north was allied more with Saudi Arabia, more conservative. The south was socialist. The north conquered, wars till today, still held with an iron fist. And then you've got Iraq. Iraq under Saddam Hussein. Now, why am I telling you this? Is because all these dictators had a pivotal role in what's happening today. Saddam Hussein wasn't bothering anybody. He was doing a good job. He was keeping everything aligned for the Western world. But the real importance, the Iranian pivot after the Shah, America and the West felt a great loss from not having Iran on its side. Iraq wasn't a critical piece. So when America conquered Iraq in 2001, I believe, if that was the exact date.
Just destabilized things, didn't it?
Well, what they did was, this was a favor to Iran.
Because Iran had a war with Iraq.
Right,
Remember that?
right.
Yeah, just a year or
Saddam
two
Hussein
before, yeah.
used poison gas and killed thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of Iranians. So this was a great threat all the time to Iran. That's why they started with this whole nuclear idea. They were looking primarily...
You mean the weapons?
The weapons, the weaponization of the whole culture. Was
In Iran?
In Iran, to protect against the southern flanks.
Okay.
To have control of what was traditionally their sphere of dominance. Iraq and Saudi Arabia. Now the Saudis don't like that at all. Now the Saudis come actually not from Shiite or Sunnis, they come from Wahhabis, which is a more like Salafist, like a very orthodox form of Sunniism. So you can see that all these players with a different religious origin basically on whether Muhammad was a descendant from his uncle or the descendant should be in the next line of hierarchy and so on in general transfer of power and so. So all these other players there. Now, why should America or Europe care about anything? Because they need the what? The oil. They need the oil. Now now consider one new technology thing in terms of America's thinking. America is not totally dependent on foreign oil for the last 15 years. Big change of game plan. Big strategic implication. Number one. Consider number two. Egypt used to supply Israel a lot of its oil and natural gas. And until recently, they held us almost by a noose unless we wanted to buy oil from Venezuela. Again, not a friend of Israel and the West. And the other place we used to buy oil from were Iran. So now if suddenly all your oil is threatened, what could be the best thing that could happen to the Jews in Israel? The new source of energy. So first everybody got excited.
You mean like renewable energy?
Renewable energy. Everybody got
Okay.
excited, and that's where the birth of the Better Place concept started.
Yes.
The firm that went bankrupt. If you read today's New York
I
Times.
remember it well.
You're right? So why did it go bankrupt? It was such, and also a Better Place came to Maui in Hawaii. So why did it suddenly, what happened? Israel discovered natural gas off its shore, enough for the next 50
In the
years.
Mediterranean.
In the Mediterranean, between Israel and Cyprus, a distance of 90 miles, just like the distance to Cuba.
Within territorial
The
waters.
right?
Yes.
So suddenly, not only is there enough natural gas to power everything for the next 50 years, there's also enough to sell and make some money. So suddenly, again, energy, very important player. Energy, Iran's energy exports income has gone down 50% since the embargo, since the, not embargo, what they call it, the...
Yeah, it was
Western
embargo.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now, so we've got power, politics, religion, energy. and this is the mix. Now, everybody has been trying to see how you could reach some kind of modus vivendi, live along with the Iranians, everybody else. No one expected the Arab Spring, which is the latest manifestation of conflict within the Muslim Arab world. Also, no one expected America to get involved for 20 years or 10 years, 10 years in the Iraqi fiasco, in the Afghani fiasco, and also in the fact that there was no benefit whatsoever, just expenditure fund and expenditure of legitimacy in terms of intervention.
Credibility.
Credibility.
Yeah.
Credibility.
Yeah.
And again, this has to do with the memory, the historical memory of where we have been in America. So you got all, this is the setup. This is the way the plate looks.
As of when?
As of until this plate started changing when the issue of the Syrian civil war started. Suddenly,
But what about Omid Ahmadinejad?
Ahmadinejad was just like, you know they have these page boys in the Congress and they go and bring notes and what is the next meeting?
That's Ahmadinejad.
And they sometimes tell a joke to the congressman and he laughs, and Ahmadinejad was a distraction,
He was nasty, though.
He kept the Israelis and the Jews on their toes. He annoyed them, and so, the people ruling in Iran, they said, he's a distraction from our now developing the ultimate weapons. Let him distract them. He says there's no Holocaust. This is really good entertainment. Every time on American television, you look and read it in Israel, no Holocaust, everybody gets inside. Hit the panic button, right? But this was all a distraction. This is all a distraction for the main event, okay? So let's talk about,
Wait.
yes.
We're going to take a break.
Okay.
So, there's a cliffhanger now.
No
The main
problem.
event. We're going to go to the main event now. Oh, I'm really enjoying this. There's so many things at play. That's what makes it interesting. And that's the reality in our world, isn't it? It's not just one thing. It's not linear in any way. This is Rafi Boritzer. He's a lecturer at West Oahu campus, UH. We're talking today West of Asia here at Think Tech. And our discussion is about the Israeli view of the talks with Iran. And wow, this is a fascinating discussion. We'll be right back after this break.
Aloha, I'm Nicole Horry for Think Tech. For nearly half a century, the Hawaii Foreign Trade Zone No. 9 has brought the benefits of the Foreign Trade Zone program to Hawaii businesses and entrepreneurs. DBET, the Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism, operates Hawaii's Foreign Trade Zone program to encourage international business and economic development. The Foreign Trade Zone's mission is to increase the amount of international trading activity in Hawaii, thereby providing employment opportunities for the residents of our island state. For more information, see ftz9.org. I'm Nicole Horry. Mahalo.
We're back. We're live. We're with Rafi Boritzer, a lecturer at West Oahu UH. We're talking about West of Asia today in Think Tech Hawaii and the Israeli view of the talks with Iran. And may I say that it's really valuable to drill down here because this is not, sound bites. This is analysis. It's based on, historical analysis of multiple factors, and you need a little time to do that. So again, thank you for being here, Rafi.
My pleasure.
You're going to talk about the main event, which is the nuclear initiative.
Well, there's some landmines in the area,
Please,
and I
please,
don't want
let's do the
anybody to walk.
landmines.
Let's do the landmines. So, okay, first landmine, the Palestinians. Nice folks. I served in the military in the West Bank, what I call still the occupied territory because it is occupied, but it's a little football. It's a little how you call it, amulet. Excuse me, an amulet. You know how you can hold an amulet, rub it for good luck. Whether it's a religious symbol, whether it's
an icon.
An icon.
Okay.
So the Palestinian-Israeli issue is always useful to anybody who has nothing else to keep them busy at the present moment. And this goes way from Netanyahu to Kerry to Ahmadinejad, all kinds of people, people in Brazil. I mean, the PLO bombed the Argentinian embassy, Israeli embassy in Argentina years ago and killed many people. But we're still trying to get the guys extradited to the United States or to Israel. So, the Palestinians. Why are the Palestinians important? The Palestinians, unfortunately, because they have become divided among themselves. And when we talk about division, I don't want anybody to think that the state of Israel was established without division. We had Jews killing Jews while fighting the English at the same time to get independence. Why? Because one side believed in one set of historical story and the other side believed in the other. So whether it was religious right wing or based on setting the state up as a religious entity or setting it up as a socialist, in effect it became neither, but it was a good distraction for a long time and allowed the world to focus on things that will happen. So the Palestinians were actually a thorn in the side of Israel that was predicted by actually a colleague of mine called Meron Ben-Venisti. Meron Ben-Venisti is a sociologist. He must be around 80 right now, and he was deputy mayor of Jerusalem when I first went into the military in '69. And he said, the conquest 2 years ago in the '67 war, when we took over all of Sinai, all of the West Bank, west of the Jordan River from Jordan in the '67 war, and the Golan Heights, and occupying it, if we don't get rid of this, and everybody thought that maybe by '79 we made peace with Egypt, it actually started the process that was supposed to move it into independence, we are going to pay a heavy price. Not the Palestinians. The Israelis are going to have a heavy price, and it's not going to be inflicted by guns. It's going to be inflicted by Israelis against Israelis. They're going to chew themselves up and grind themselves up into smithereens.
And sure enough,
that what is happening. We've been talking about a state for the Palestinians, which was envisioned by Carter, by Sadat, and by Begin, that this would happen. We're still in the So this is now a peace. So in terms of how does it play with Iran, though? Well, Netanyahu doesn't like the agreement, any kind of agreement, I would say, that involves Iran. He would like to keep the status quo. The status quo, no war, no peace. Everything stays the same.
There's lots of tension.
Tension, because then
And
he can
epithets hurled.
well, also tension is good for him. He's been many times prime minister and voted out. He knows that if peace comes around, he won't be prime minister.
So you mean it's personal?
Yes, actually, if we talk about Prime Minister Netanyahu, not that I, have personal relationship with him, but he was greatly influenced by two things. One, he went to MIT, and the other thing is he was born to his father and mother. And his father was one of the early right-wing revisionists who see that we should own the whole land of Israel because the Bible says so, even though he's not religious. But this is a good political
manifest
position.
destiny.
Manifest destiny. He doesn't understand that America figured it didn't work about 200 years ago, but he's still happy. So keeping that position keeps him in power. As Israel has also followed the American, unfortunately more Republican than Democratic ethos of, the ruling class shall remain, the ruling class gets stronger, and the rest of us will have to work for them. He believes that this is a good philosophy. I don't know if he learned it at MIT, I doubt that, but he's kind of expanded on it. And he believes that the support that he needs will come from the political extreme right and the religious right. And that's how his coalition is founded. But every once in a while, to appease the U.S., or to appease the American population that is not fundamentalist Christian or Orthodox Jewish, he will throw in something about a peace relation, giving the Palestinians, the preliminary borders for their state. And this is where we are now. Kerry has gone over. Kerry is another one in a long list of well-meaning American diplomats, really good-thinking people and so on, who will be disappointed. Because Netanyahu is more concerned about juggling his internal political structure than, pleasing anybody or being noted in great history that he solved the Israeli-Palestinian problem.
He doesn't care about that.
He doesn't
On
care.
the other hand, he's not a party to the agreement that's contemplated either, is he?
Well, he is. He's a spoiler. He is not a contributor. Okay? The only role he can play and disrupt, which I think will not be successful, because it's in the interest of the 3 point people we mentioned, that there be a period of quietude in the Middle East and Far East. But it's not going to be quiet immediately because there are some things that have to be settled. But those three players, the Turks, the Iranians, and the Egyptians, they can actually, with the United States, bring around a modus vivendi that will last with the Iranians.
Okay.
Because America wants, and the West, it's not only America, the Western world, they want peace, one, because of the oil, second, because it's not good for business.
Okay. So, holding that thought,
Yeah.
why have the Iranians been so interested in developing nuclear weapons? Why do they think they need nuclear? Why did they go to so much trouble? And why did countries like Russia, for example, help them do that? And others, who knows, under the hood, what's been going on?
I think that what they learned from the Iranian-Iraqi war was that only the strong survive. What they learned from Israel was ambiguity about nuclear weapons is a weapon. Okay? Very, very important. So they learned that. Mm-hmm. They saw that America went with impunity in 2001 into Iraq for reasons, America's reasons.
Yeah.
Whether it was to help Iran, or maybe there was a byproduct that was thought of later, or maybe it was to control the Middle East oil together with Saudi Arabia, all kinds of issues. But as we know that things happen in America's interest, which you certainly couldn't project 20 years ago in 2001, has changed. The loss in Afghanistan, after the Russians learned about it, after the other people all learned about the loss in Iraq, taught a lesson.
Okay, well, before things changed, before these talks began, before the turnabout, if you will, and I guess it's more than a turnabout just of the U.S. and Iran, it's a turnabout by all, or at least a number of the players on the stage there. There was some achievement. I mean, some advance in terms of building nuclear facilities. I mean, the Israelis, as I recall, did some damage to them at one point, but essentially they moved ahead. They have achieved certain technology, and they're closer to making a nuclear bomb that could blow up the whole region than they were. Are these talks going to be able to roll all that back, or is it just creating a stasis?
Well, let's look at when they started. I believe they started at the same time the Iraqis started. When they were in the war with Iraq,
The
Iraq was
weapons of
building the
mass
Osirak
destruction and all
reactor
that.
that Israel wiped out in '81, I believe.
Yeah.
They started about the same time. As a counterbalance. The change maker was primarily the fact that the Pakistani Dr. Khan, Professor Khan, he gave them the technology, like he gave for money, of course, it wasn't for free, but he sold the technology to Iran and he sold it to North Korea. And so they started a small thing. I think
That was technology they got from us, wasn't it? Didn't the Pakistanis get nuclear technology?
Well,
it's like a virus. It goes everywhere.
I mean,
But this
today
guy,
every kid can make an atomic weapon. It's just how much time, how much money, and how much political support you got. I mean,
did the Russians help the Iranians?
I think the Russians play spoilers whenever they can. They were courting India for a long time until the Russian Empire fell, and then India says, "Hey, we don't care about the socialist empire anymore," and so they were looking for others. They've always been trying to play. The Iranians fear the Russians, just like the Turks fear the Russians. That's two of the very important issues here. That's why the Russians are with America and the West here on the other side, even though they can play like I'm a buddy of yours. They are the conduit at this time. And by doing that, the Russians are showing America that America needs them. Okay, so they can play the neutral.
Perception.
Everything is
Right.
perception. There's a lot of stagecraft here.
Yes.
That is very, very critical.
How do we know how to find it, Rafi? I mean, you're revealing all these things, and I mean, it sure sounds right to me about the stagecraft, but from after this conversation is over, how do I identify what is stagecraft and what is reality?
Well,
Where do
first
I
of all,
go?
so keep in mind some things. Like the foreign minister of Iran, he's been in the West more of his life than he's been in Iran. Okay, he has all the matter. He knows the American psyche. What we don't know in the West, and especially in America, America went to war in Iraq with 400 people who speak Arabic to subdue a population of millions, to control them with 200,000 troops, and 400 people speak Arabic. I mean, how do you tell a guy, put your weapon down, this is a roadblock? I mean, without a lot of, the same thing when we talk about the Iranians. I don't know if there's any, aside from some of the top universities, I don't know if there are any institutes or if we teach anything. We don't teach anybody anything about those cultures. How can you read a newspaper if you don't understand behavior? Even the language, even if you get a translator, you don't understand nuance, culture, behavior. Yeah. When people talk so dismissively in America about 1.4 billion or whatever number of Muslims are in the world, like it's one big group. I don't know, can you talk about the Catholics in Brazil and the Catholics in the Vatican and the Catholics up in Lake George, New York with the same breath? I mean, is there any similarity? I mean, just because they have the same name doesn't mean it's the same people and so on. Yeah. So when we watch the Iranians, the reason they are talking is because both sides want this agreement, okay? The question is now at what price? At what price they can sell it to the most hardened critics. In America, the hardened price is the Congress that will have to approve this agreement. And in Iran, it's the Revolutionary Guards. Everything else doesn't matter in Iran. Iran, it's the Ayatollah Khamenei and the Revolutionary Guards. They own most of the economy. They run all the military. They make a lot of money from making weapons. The whole nuclear enterprise is part of the revolution.
Are they the ones that took down the signs on the billboards, the anti-American signs, or are they the ones that continue to burn the American flag? Because both of these things are happening at the same time.
That doesn't mean anything.
That's window dressing.
Let me ask you something.
It's
Have you ever
stage play.
created a website?
Yeah.
Okay, I know you created a website. You create the show every week.
Yeah.
So when you create the show, do you stage manage anything? Do you do the lighting, the camera, the feedback? Do you tell me, please have a drink of water? We're going to have a 1 minute break. They're stage managing the political scenario. They're in control of it. And there's no problem.
Do whatever they want.
They control the Twitter, the Facebook, just like the NSA. Except that when they don't like something, they don't just write it down your name. They actually shut you off right there, and then jail about 6 months. With heating your souls with electrodes, and you come around to their prevailing way of thinking. There's no
Electrodes, eh? So what's going to happen here? I mean, is this going to work? Because it hasn't worked yet.
Right.
But you sound like it's close.
Well, the real problem is the going the plutonium route. There are two issues
Okay.
that the Iranians, they can stop enriching uranium. It doesn't mean a bloody thing. You can do that in a couple of months. You can reassemble, you can redo, you can plan. You got the centrifuges that Israel was able to kill a few years ago, most of them. But now you're in this situation. The real indicators of whether it's going to work is not whether America will lift a few of the sanctions, which is critical to the process. And the Iranians want at some point in the next 5 to 7 years to totally not have any sanctions. I would think that would be their time frame.
Yeah.
The question is, will they be willing to give up the plutonium production, which is the alternate way of producing a quick hydrogen bomb, or are they going to allow inspection and control of their prime weapon testing area where they explode nuclear weapons? That's the question.
Okay.
There's a place that's been used, I
Which they
believe,
haven't
once
really
or twice.
exposed that yet. Yeah.
Right. So the question is, will they be willing to give that up? That will tell you whether they are serious, because to agree to anything less would be to what Netanyahu said is a risk.
Yeah.
But if they agree, you cannot, because what is happening, they use framing of the conversation, the discussion, negotiations to suit them. Like, okay, the West we will give up this. What is the West giving up? Well, it's not a question of quid pro quo. You're doing something in violation of the agreement you made with the civilized world and the United Nations Atomic Energy Commission. So the West doesn't have to give you anything in return. So the framing is very important of this conversation during the negotiation. The question will come to how close they can get, what the big groups supporting the negotiations, as I said, in Iran and the U.S., what is it that they will agree to do? Will they support this? And what is going to happen in Syria, because we saw now there's some doubts about the Syrian chemical thing. So
Okay.
there's some question of whether there's some secret, that they divulged everything, but there's really a report question. We will have to wait and see what's in Israel's interest if they reveal this information in public, and what the Russians do about it, what's in the interest of the Chinese.
How do you do this without a scorecard?
You need a scorecard.
But somebody called this, maybe you will agree, somebody called this the Super Bowl of diplomacy, international negotiations.
I think that this will rewrite the book on geopolitical confrontations and resolution. I think there are going to be lots of books about it, but we'll have to wait, because I don't think it's going to happen tomorrow.
Will it work? I keep asking you that.
You know what? Everything in the works in the world is basically limited to our lifespan. So we have to look: is it going to work in the next 5 years,
Okay.
or is it going to work in the next 10 years, or is the problem going to be left to generation? If I may just use an example, look at what happened in the Philippines just 2 days ago.
Yeah.
The question is, everybody's been talking about global warming except people who live south of Tennessee and south of Louisiana. They believe that this is just a hoax.
Right. They believe most things are hoaxes.
Right. So, if they stand in their underwear in the aftermath of a hurricane, they'll say, oh, maybe this is just an accident.
Shigatakanai. You can't help it.
So I think if you're looking for success in the talks, first of all, you asked me about Netanyahu, so I would say he only has 2 pressure points. He can go around the American administration's desires and goals by going, as he has done in the past, talking to the congressmen, so I'm trying to put a screwdriver in the gears.
That might be easy this term. Next term it might not
Right,
be so easy.
I think that's a very dangerous game to play.
Dangerous game,
Okay,
yes.
That's a dangerous game to play, because even if it's not President Obama, it could be President Clinton, or it could be anybody else. No matter what, who will say, hey, you know
Don't
what?
do that.
Don't do it. The other thing is that he was always counting on a very heavy Jewish and Israeli-oriented base. If you read the latest reports about Jews in America, less and less are actually affiliated with Israel or Jewish life as such. So their loyalty or support through legislators in terms of funding and so on may also get weakened. And
So-
the other, now just let me mention the other piece. That's the one piece he has there. But Kerry has very much invested in the Israel-Palestinian peace talks. He can jam up the Israel-Palestinian negotiations.
So that's a lever
That's a lever.
on
Those are-
Israel, on
Is-
Netanyahu.
Right, well, that's a lever on
Israel.
Netanyahu on America.
Got
He
it.
can either go to the Congress, or he can just dismiss the Palestinians and say, I'm not doing a peace agreement with them,
Yeah, yeah.
and that will jam the whole thing to display his displeasure. But as far as going and bombing Iran, individual Israel, I don't believe it's going to happen. I don't believe it. I didn't believe it 3 years ago. I don't believe it now, because at the most you could delay them. But what you've done, you've brought perhaps a nuclear holocaust to the Middle East. I mean, the oil field. Nobody wins on that such a confrontation.
Right.
And the
right.
other player I wanted to mention is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is a very, very important player.
Take 30 seconds and tell me why.
30 seconds, because first of all their alliances are in disruption. And their mode of operation, the Wahhabi rule, the very strict Muslim rule, if we just see the driving issue with the women there, they are now worried because everything is breaking up again. Egypt is not the close ally it was. The Gulf states are operating independently. They've got the Shia-Sunni divide. They've got the Iraq under the control of the Shiite, but the Sunnis being the rebels. All these things. So Saudi Arabia feels very vulnerable. Also, Americans, the lower dependence on the oil and fracking and all this natural gas, and
Everything is changing.
everything is in play.
To change, to la même.
Well, it used to be that when you play poker, you watch the other person's eyes
Yeah,
and face no longer.
can't. Yeah. Rafi Boritzer, a lecturer par excellence from Oahu, West Oahu campus of University of Hawaii, talking west of Asia, the Israeli view of the talks with Iran. What a discussion. We have to continue this. It's a moving target. All those vectors are moving. We have to come back and check back with you, Rafi.
Well, if you're talking east of Asia, I'd certainly also like to come back, because lots
Okay.
happening in east of Asia as
Okay.
well.
For sure, one way or the other. Rafi Boritzer. Thank you, Rafi.
Thank you.
Aloha. We'll be back in a minute with our next program.